What happens when a man who has dedicated his life to serving his country is seen as a threat simply because of the color of his skin? This isn't a hypothetical question. This is the true story of Major Weston Briggs, a decorated Air Force officer. One quiet evening on his way home to his family, a simple car breakdown turned into a nightmare. He found himself in handcuffs, his uniform, his service, and his dignity disregarded by two police officers consumed by prejudice. But they made one critical mistake. They allowed him one phone call. They had no idea that call would connect them to one of the most powerful men on the nearby military base, unleashing a storm of consequences that would not only cost them their jobs, but dismantle their entire lives. This is a story of injustice, integrity, and the devastating power of karma. The engine on the 2018 Ford F-150 didn't die with a dramatic roar or a clattering of metal. It met with a quiet, pathetic cough. One moment, Major Weston Briggs was humming along to a classic rock station, the steady rumble of the V8, a familiar comfort. The next, there was only the hiss of the air conditioning vents and the truck coasting to a silent, powerless stop. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," he muttered, steering the now heavy vehicle to the shoulder of the road. He was on Sycamore Crest Drive, a winding road that cut through the affluent, manicured lawns of the Oakwood suburb. It was a neighborhood of two-story colonials and pristine landscaping, a place where the silence of the evening was a prized commodity. And now his black F-150 was a dark, hulking intrusion on that peace. Weston sighed, running a hand over his short, cropped hair. It had been a long day. A very long day. He'd spent the last 72 hours at a rigorous training exercise at Peterson Air Force Base, leading a team of para-rescuemen through a series of demanding CRE survival, evasion, resistance, and escape simulations. He still wore his olive-drab flight suit, the various patches and insignia, his name, Briggs, his rank and his squadron's emblem stitched neatly onto the fabric. It was comfortable, practical, and usually a symbol of respect. Usually. He clicked on his hazards, the rhythmic flashing of orange light, seeming offensively loud in the tranquil twilight. He pulled out his phone. Service was spotty. 1 bar. He needed to call a tow truck, and then his wife, Sarah, to let her know he'd be late. Their 7-year-old daughter, Maya, would be waiting for her goodnight story. That thought, more than the dead engine, made his chest tighten with frustration. He got out of the truck, the cool evening air, a welcome relief. He stretched his back, feeling the familiar aches of a man who pushed his body to its limits for a living. As he walked to the front of the truck to pop the hood, a mostly useless but instinctive gesture, he was keenly aware of his surroundings. He was a 6'3" black man in a military uniform, standing beside a broken-down vehicle in a neighborhood where he was an anomaly. He'd seen the curtains twitch in one of the houses. He knew what it could look like to some people. He just hoped reason would prevail. He was leaning over the engine, his phone finally getting a stable enough signal to dial roadside assistance when the headlights washed over him. They weren't the gentle beams of a passing civilian. They were bright, sharp, and accompanied by the unmistakable silhouette of a police cruiser. It pulled up behind his truck, its spotlight pinning him against his own vehicle like a specimen under a microscope. The cruiser's doors opened. 2 officers emerged, their shapes backlit and imposing. Weston straightened up slowly, holding his phone in one hand, his other hand raised and visible. He'd given this lecture 100 times. To young airmen, especially airmen of color, de-escalate. Comply. Announce your movements. Survive the encounter. It was a different kind of survival training, one not taught in any official Sierra manual. "Evening, officers," Weston said, his voice calm and steady. The older of the two officers, a man with a heavy build and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl, approached him. His name tag read Miller. The younger officer, Peterson, hung back slightly, his hand hovering near his sidearm. He looked nervous, his eyes darting from Weston to the truck, then back to Weston. "Sir, we received a call about a suspicious individual casing the neighborhood." Miller said, his voice flat and accusatory. He didn't say a man matching your description, but it was heavily implied. "My truck broke down," Weston explained, gesturing to the silent engine. "I was just calling for a tow. Roadside assistance is on its way." Miller's eyes roamed over Weston, lingering on his flight suit. It wasn't the crisp dress blues that civilians recognized from movies. It was a functional working uniform, and to a suspicious eye, it could just be a set of drab coveralls. "That's a nice story," Miller said, a slight sneer on his lips. "License and registration." "Of course," Weston said. He started to move toward the driver's side door. "Whoa, hold on," Miller barked, putting a hand on his holstered weapon. "Tell me what you're doing." Weston stopped, keeping his hands where Miller could see them. "My wallet and the truck's registration are in the glove compartment, officer. I'm going to retrieve them for you." "You stay right there," Miller commanded. "Peterson, keep an eye on him." Peterson gave a short, jerky nod, his gaze fixed on Weston. Miller walked over to the passenger side of the truck and peered inside with his flashlight. He opened the door, rummaged through the glove compartment, and pulled out the registration and Weston's wallet. He flipped open the wallet, his flashlight beam dancing over the contents. "Major Weston Briggs," Miller read aloud, his tone laced with disbelief. He pulled out the military ID and shone the light on it, comparing the picture to the man standing before him. "United States Air Force." "That's correct, officer," Weston said, hoping the proof of his identity and service would end this charade. It didn't. Miller chuckled a low, ugly sound. He walked back toward Weston, holding the two IDs. "You know anybody can buy a uniform at a surplus store. Anybody can get a fake ID." Weston felt a cold knot of anger form in his stomach. He'd survived enemy territory simulations, endured brutal interrogation training, and led men through life-or-death scenarios. To be standing on a quiet suburban street, being questioned like a common thief by a local cop who refused to see the truth in front of him, was an insult that cut deeper than any physical blow. "Officer, that is a government-issued active-duty military identification," Weston said, his voice losing a fraction of its calm. "My credentials are fully verifiable. If you have any doubts, you can call the Public Affairs Office at Peterson Air Force Base." "I'm not calling anyone," Miller snapped. "You fit the description. A resident was concerned, so now I'm concerned. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." The world seemed to slow down. The flashing lights, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It all faded into a dull roar in Weston's ears. "Officer, for what reason?" Weston asked, his seer training kicking in, forcing him to keep his voice level, to not betray the rage and humiliation boiling inside him. "For my safety and for yours," Miller said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're being detained while we figure out who you really are. Now turn around, boy, before I make you." The word boy hung in the air, an old and vicious poison. It was the final confirmation. This wasn't about a suspicious person anymore. It wasn't about a broken-down truck. It was about a black man standing in a white neighborhood. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "Miller, maybe we should just run the ID." "Quiet, Peterson," Miller snarled, not taking his eyes off Weston. You want to learn how to do this job or not? This is how you control a scene." Weston looked from Miller's hate-filled face to Peterson's conflicted one. He knew he had a choice. He could resist. He was physically capable of handling both officers. But he knew where that path led: a resisting arrest charge, a physical altercation, a news headline about an aggressive suspect, and at worst a body bag. Or he could comply. He could endure the indignity, swallow the poison, and live to fight another way. He thought of Sarah. He thought of Maya waiting for her story. Slowly, deliberately, Weston turned around and placed his hands behind his back. The cold, sharp bite of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists was a profound shock. The metal links bit into the fabric of his flight suit, the symbol of his honor and service now used to bind him like a criminal. Miller pushed him firmly against the side of his own truck. "Now," the officer said, his voice low and triumphant in Weston's ear, "let's see who you really are." As Weston stood there, humiliated and powerless on the side of the road, the flashing red and blue lights painting a chaotic scene on the pristine houses around him, he had no idea that the worst part of his night was about to become the worst part of Officer Miller's entire life. "You get one phone call," Miller said, his tone mocking. He'd finished a thorough and completely unnecessary pat-down, finding nothing more than a pen and a set of keys. He shoved Weston into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic of the seat was unforgiving, the cage between the front and back a stark symbol of his new temporary status. "I need my phone," Weston stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He was compartmentalizing, treating this as a new, unexpected phase of a SARE exercise, the objective: survive and overcome. Peterson, who had been silent throughout the arrest, retrieved the phone from the hood of the F-150 and handed it to Miller. Miller glanced at the screen. "Who are you going to call your lawyer?" he sneered. "I'm calling my commanding officer," Weston replied. Miller laughed out loud. "Oh, this is rich. You're really sticking with this soldier boy story, huh? Fine. Make your call. Let's see what General has to say." He passed the phone through the cage's opening. Weston took it. His hands were cuffed in front of him, making the simple act of navigating the screen awkward. His fingers felt thick and clumsy. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering for a moment over Sarah, wifey. The urge to hear her voice was overwhelming, to tell her he was okay, but would be late. But he knew that call would only bring her panic and worry. It wouldn't solve the problem. He needed a key, not a comfort. He continued scrolling until he found the contact he was looking for, Colin Davies. Colonel James Bulldog Davies was the group commander of the 366th Special Tactics Group. He was a man whose legend preceded him. A career combat controller, Davies had seen action in every major conflict for the past 2 decades. He was known for his tactical brilliance, his unyielding standards, and a ferocious, almost paternal protectiveness of the men and women under his command. His nickname, Bulldog, wasn't just for his looks. It was for his tenacity. Once he bit down on a problem, he didn't let go. Weston pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. "Davies," a gravelly voice answered. No pleasantries, just the name. "Sir, this is Major Briggs," Weston said. In the front seat, Miller rolled his eyes, a smirk playing on his face. "Briggs, what's your status? I thought you were heading home." Davies' voice crackled through the speaker. "There's been a complication, sir," Weston said, choosing his words carefully. "My vehicle is disabled on Sycamore Crest Drive, just off the West Gate. I've been detained by local law enforcement, Oakwood PD." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a dense, heavy silence. When Davies spoke again, the gravel in his voice had been replaced by ice. Detained for what, Major? The stated reason was suspicion of casing the area, sir. Are you in custody? I'm in the back of a patrol car. In handcuffs, sir. Another pause, this one even more charged than the last. Weston could almost feel the atmospheric pressure changing over the phone line. He could picture Davies in his office, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing. "Put the ranking officer on the phone," Davies commanded. It was not a request. Weston looked at Miller. "My CO wants to speak with you." Miller scoffed but held out his hand, intrigued by the theatrics. "Let me talk to your colonel." He took the phone and put it on speaker. "This is Officer Miller of the Oakwood Police Department. Who am I speaking with?" "This is Colonel James Davies, United States Air Force." The voice boomed from the small speaker, suddenly filling the entire car with an unmistakable aura of command. The change in volume and intensity was so abrupt that Peterson flinched. "I understand you have one of my officers, Major Weston Briggs, in your custody. You will explain to me right now under what probable cause you have a decorated Air Force major in handcuffs in the back of your car." Miller's smirk faltered. This didn't sound like some buddy from a surplus store. This sounded like the real thing. "Sir," Miller began, his own voice losing some of its bluster, "your major was in a high-end neighborhood acting suspiciously. His truck broke down on his way home from my base officer Miller." Davies cut him off, his voice like grinding stone. "He was in his duty uniform. He presented you with his active duty military identification. I ask you again, what is the specific, articulable, probable cause for his arrest? And I suggest you choose your next words very, very carefully." Miller was sweating now. He glanced at Peterson, who was looking straight ahead, his face pale. The power dynamic in the small car had just done a 180-degree flip. "Well, sir, we had a call." "I don't give a damn about your call," Davies roared, the speaker distorting with the force of his voice. "I give a damn about my officer, who you have illegally detained." "What is your badge number, Officer Miller?" My badge number is 724, Miller stammered. "And your partner, badge 911, Officer Peterson." "Officer Miller, badge 724, and Officer Peterson, badge 911. Davies said, the slow, deliberate recitation of their names and numbers a clear threat. "You have 60 seconds to take those handcuffs off of my major and offer him your sincerest apology. Your watch commander's name and number are to be provided to him immediately. If this is not done, I will personally be there in 10 minutes with my entire legal staff and the Base Security Forces Command. We will then have a much longer, more formal conversation with your Chief of Police, the Mayor, and every news outlet in this state. Do you understand me?" Miller was speechless. The threat wasn't just credible. It was an avalanche poised to crash down on them. An Air Force colonel bringing the full weight of the U.S. military's legal apparatus down on a small-town police department was not a fight they could win. "Yes, sir." Miller croaked, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "You're wasting seconds, officer," Davies said, and the line went dead. A stunned silence filled the car. Miller stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a snake. He looked back at Weston, whose expression was neutral, impassive, but in his eyes there was a glint of steel that Miller hadn't seen before. "Get him out," Miller hissed at Peterson. Peterson practically scrambled out of the car. He opened the back door, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the key for the handcuffs. "I'm so sorry, sir," he mumbled, not meeting Weston's eyes. The handcuffs clicked open. Weston rubbed his wrists, the circulation returning with a tingling sensation. He stepped out of the car, standing tall. He was no longer a suspect. He was Major Weston Briggs of the United States Air Force, and his bulldog was on the way. Miller got out of the car, his face flushed with a toxic mix of anger and fear. The role of the powerful interrogator had been stripped from him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. "Look," Miller started, "things just got out of hand." Weston just looked at him, his silence more damning than any accusation. Headlights appeared up the road, but it wasn't a tow truck. It was another Oakwood PD cruiser, this one a sergeant's vehicle, driving faster than the speed limit. It screeched to a halt behind Miller's car. A heavy-set sergeant with salt and pepper hair got out, his face a thundercloud. "Miller Peterson, what in God's name did you two do?" Sergeant Wallace yelled as he stomped towards them. "The chief just called my cell screaming his head off, said he got a call from the Pentagon." "The Pentagon? Are you insane?" Miller's jaw dropped. He had thought the colonel was bluffing or at least exaggerating. He was wrong. The phone call hadn't just shaken the foundation. It had triggered a seismic event, and they were standing at the epicenter. The arrival of Sergeant Wallace transformed the scene from a tense standoff into a full-blown crisis for the Oakwood Police Department. Wallace, a 25-year veteran of the force, looked at the situation and saw a career-ending lawsuit in the making. He saw a decorated Air Force major in his flight suit, a broken-down truck, and two of his officers, one belligerent and the other terrified, who had clearly overstepped their authority in the worst possible way. "Major Briggs," Wallace said, his voice respectful and apologetic, as he approached Weston, deliberately ignoring his own officers for the moment. "I am Sergeant Frank Wallace. On behalf of the Oakwood Police Department, I want to offer my most profound apologies for the actions of these officers." "Apology noted, Sergeant," Weston replied coolly. His adrenaline was receding, replaced by a cold, focused anger. "I require the names and badge numbers of these officers for my report." "You have them, sir," Wallace confirmed, shooting a venomous glare at Miller. "And I assure you, a formal internal affairs investigation will be opened first thing in the morning. You will be contacted by the IA lieutenant." Just then another vehicle arrived. This one was a sleek black SUV with government plates. It parked behind Wallace's cruiser, and from the driver's side emerged Colonel James Bulldog Davies. He was in his own flight suit, and he moved with an energy that belied his age. His eyes, famous on base for being able to spot a flaw in a flight plan from 100 yards, were locked on Miller. "Officer Miller," Davies said, his voice dangerously quiet, as he walked straight past the sergeant and stopped a foot in front of the officer. "You have a lot of courage. It takes a brave man to put handcuffs on one of my officers for the crime of waiting for a tow truck." Miller visibly shrank under the colonel's gaze. He looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on a final exam. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Davies repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a foul odor. "Is that what you call it? When you disregard a military ID? When you use racial slurs?" Miller's blood ran cold. I never—" "Don't," Davies cut him off with a slice of his hand. "Don't you dare lie to me. My major's integrity is beyond reproach. Yours, however, is now a matter of official United States Air Force concern." He turned to Weston. "Major, are you harmed?" "No, sir. Just my pride," Weston said. "Pride can be mended," Davies said, then turned back to Sergeant Wallace. "Sergeant, my officer will be filing a formal complaint with your department, the city, the state, and the Department of Justice. I will be filing a complaint on behalf of the Department of Defense regarding the mistreatment of a service member." We will be requesting all body camera footage, dash cam footage, and a copy of the initial 911 call. I expect your full and unconditional cooperation." Sergeant Wallace nodded, looking overwhelmed. "Yes, Colonel. You will have it." The tow truck finally arrived, its yellow lights adding to the chaotic palette of the scene. As the driver began hooking up the F-150, Davies put a hand on Weston's shoulder. "Let's get you home, Major. I'll drive you." Weston nodded, took one last look at the scene, at Miller's face, pale with rage and fear, at Peterson looking utterly broken, at the flashing lights that had turned his quiet evening into a public spectacle, and got into the Colonel's SUV. As they drove away, leaving the wreckage of 2 police careers in their wake, the real battle was only just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of formal proceedings. The internal affairs investigation, led by a stone-faced lieutenant named Diaz, began immediately. Miller and Peterson were placed on administrative leave, their guns and badges confiscated. The interviews were a study in contrasts. Officer Colton Miller sat in the sterile interview room defiant. He believed the blue wall of silence would protect him. He crafted a narrative where Major Briggs had been uncooperative, verbally aggressive, and that his military story seemed suspicious. The guy was agitated. Miller lied, his voice steady. He was puffed up, confrontational. "I couldn't be sure the uniform was real. In this day and age, you can't be too careful. I cuffed him for officer safety. It was a by-the-book detention based on a credible citizen complaint." He omitted the slurs. He omitted his refusal to properly check the ID. He painted himself as a diligent cop doing a tough job in a dangerous world. He was confident his word, the word of a 15-year police veteran, would hold more weight than the man he had arrested. Officer Kyle Peterson's interview was different. He was a nervous wreck. At 26, he'd been on the force for just 2 years. He had looked up to Miller, seeing him as a seasoned, street-smart mentor. Now he saw him as the man who had ruined his life. "Colton, Officer Miller." "He was in charge of the scene," Peterson stammered to Lieutenant Diaz. "I just followed his lead." "Did you believe Major Briggs was a threat?" "Officer Peterson," Diaz asked, his eyes unblinking. Peterson hesitated. I wasn't sure." Miller said he was suspicious. "Did you hear Officer Miller use a racial slur?" Peterson's face went white. He licked his dry lips. This was the moment. He could lie stand with Miller and hope they both weathered the storm. Or he could tell the truth. He thought of his young wife pregnant with their first child. He thought of the shame he felt when those handcuffs clicked on the Major's wrists. I can't recall specifically." He mumbled a weak, pathetic lie. He had chosen his side. For now. Meanwhile, the story had leaked. A reporter from a local news station, tipped off by a source inside the embattled police department, ran a story, "Decorated Air Force Major arrested alleges racial profiling." The public outcry was swift and fierce. The Oakwood Police Department's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. The chief of police, a politician in a uniform named Michael Evans, was forced to hold a press conference. "We take these allegations very seriously," Chief Evans said, reading from a prepared statement. "A full internal investigation is underway. We ask for the public's patience as we gather the facts. We are a department committed to fair and impartial policing for all members of our community." It was a generic, hollow statement, and everyone knew it. The pressure was mounting. The key to the entire case was the body camera footage. The department, under legal advice, was stonewalling its release, citing the ongoing investigation. They were hoping to contain it to manage the narrative, but they hadn't counted on Colonel Bulldog Davies. Davies wasn't just working through official channels. He made a call to an old friend, a U.S. Senator on the Armed Services Committee. He explained the situation calmly, factually. A decorated officer in uniform, returning from a training exercise, was racially profiled, disrespected, and wrongfully arrested. The senator in turn made a call to the governor's office. The political pressure became immense. The governor's office strongly urged the Oakwood PD to release the footage for the sake of transparency. The simple act of detaining one man had now drawn the attention of the state's highest office and the U.S. Senate. Miller and Peterson had kicked a hornet's nest, and the entire swarm was coming for them. For Weston, life had become surreal. He was back at home with Sarah and Maya, but the incident hung over the house like a shroud. Sarah was furious, her anger a protective shield for the fear she felt for her husband. What if that colonel hadn't answered Mark? She asked one night, her voice trembling. What if they had taken you to the station? What if something worse happened? Weston didn't have an answer. He just held her the image of the handcuffs, and Miller's sneering face burned into his memory. The hardest part was explaining it to Maya, who had seen the news report with his picture on it. Daddy, why were the police mean to you? She asked, her big brown eyes full of confusion. Sometimes, honey, he said, struggling for the right words. People make bad judgments. They see the outside of a person and not the inside. But it's our job to always show them what's on the inside, to show them our honor. The pressure to release the bodycam footage became unbearable. Finally, the department caved. They announced they would release the full unedited footage from both Miller's and Peterson's cameras at the end of the week. Miller was cocky. He believed the footage would be ambiguous enough to support his story. Peterson was terrified. He knew what the camera had captured. He knew it showed Miller's aggression, Weston's calm compliance, and the ugly moment of the arrest. But what neither of them knew was that the body camera wasn't the only recording of that night, and the second recording held the twist that would turn their firing into a public crucifixion. The silence in Kyle Peterson's house was a living entity. It was 3 a.m. that desolate hour when the world holds its breath, and every regret, every mistake, every fear comes out to prey on the sleepless. For 3 nights, sleep had been a stranger to him. He'd lie in the dark, the rhythmic breathing of his wife Chloe, a steady counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of failure playing in his mind. He saw it all on a relentless loop, clearer than any television screen. The arrogant swagger in Colton Miller's walk, the glint of the setting sun off the F-150's chrome bumper, the quiet, unassailable dignity in Major Weston Briggs's posture, even as the handcuffs were being ratcheted tight. He felt the cold shame of his own inaction, a physical weight that settled in his chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. He had stood there a sworn officer of the law, and been nothing more than a statue, a silent accomplice to a crime of prejudice. His lie to Lieutenant Diaz was the heaviest burden. I can't recall specifically. He had mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He had dishonored his badge, his training, and the memory of his father, a man who believed a cop's word was his bond. Now Kyle's word was worthless, a puff of smoke in a tainted wind. He slipped out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath his bare feet, and made his way to the kitchen. He stood before the window, staring out at the suburban stillness of his own street, a world away from the manicured privilege of Sycamore Crest. He was supposed to be a guardian of this peace, but he felt like a poison seeping into its foundations. You're going to wear a hole in the floor. Chloe's voice was soft, but it made him jump. She stood in the doorway, tying the sash on her robe. Her silhouette softened by the faint moonlight. The gentle curve of her belly, where their first child was growing, was a constant, silent question. What kind of man was he going to be for this baby? "I'm fine. Just couldn't sleep." He lied, but the words were flimsy and transparent. She walked over to him, her expression a mixture of love and deep-seated concern. "No, you're not fine, Kyle. I haven't seen you truly smile since that night. You're haunted. You carry it into every room you enter. Talk to me. Don't shut me out." "There's nothing to talk about," he insisted, his voice cracking. "It's an IA investigation. It'll run its course. Miller and I will get a slap on the wrist, and it'll all blow over." Chloe reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, but her eyes were piercing. "Do you believe that? Do you really believe this will just go away? Or are you just hoping it will?" She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The man I married used to stand up straight. He looked people in the eye. He wasn't afraid of bullies. I look at you now, Kyle, and you're hunched over like you're waiting for something to fall on you." Her eyes welled with tears, a sight that broke through his defenses. "The man you are right now is not the man I married." Each word was a perfectly aimed blow, shattering the fragile facade he had constructed. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a loss so profound it stole his breath. He was losing himself, and she was the only one brave enough to say it out loud. "What do I do, Chloe?" He finally choked out the question. A surrender. "If I tell the truth, I'm finished. My career is over. He'll destroy me." "And if you don't," she countered, her grip on his hand tightening. "What happens then? You live with this lie for the rest of your life. You let a man like Colton Miller define you. Your career will be over anyway, Kyle. This isn't a storm you can weather. The only question is whether you go down as his accomplice or as a man who finally found the courage to do what was right. Think about our baby. What story are you going to tell her about this? The one where her father was a coward, or the one where he made a mistake and then did everything in his power to make it right?" Her words hung in the air, a stark and unavoidable choice. He had no answer. He just pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder, a broken man seeking refuge from his own weakness. After Chloe went back to bed, Kyle found himself in the spare room he used as a home office. His duty bag sat slumped in the corner, a dark leather reminder of his disgrace. He felt an urge to throw it out, to burn it. He unzipped it, the sound harsh in the silent house. Inside were the mundane artifacts of his now suspended job notebooks, citation pads, a pair of spare cuffs, and a pen. It was a slightly thick black ballpoint pen, clipped to an inner pocket. He pulled it out, turning it over in his hand. It was heavier than it should be. And then, like a lightning strike in a fog-shrouded mind, he remembered. The argument with Miller 6 months ago. The way Miller had twisted a report to blame Kyle for a procedural error. The cold fear he'd felt, realizing how easily his partner could throw him under the bus. He'd gone online that night and ordered the pen, a digital voice recorder, his secret insurance policy. He'd gotten into the habit of clicking it on when a shift started, a silent, unseen witness. He had been wearing it that night. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. Hope, terrifying and exhilarating, flooded his veins. He fumbled with the pen, unscrewing the back to reveal a tiny USB port. With trembling hands, he plugged it into his laptop. A drive popped up on the screen. He clicked it open. There were dozens of audio files, all labeled by date. He scrolled down his finger, hovering over the file from the night of the incident. Part of him screamed not to listen, to delete the file and pretend it never existed, to stick to the lie. But Chloe's words echoed in his head. The man you are right now is not the man I married. He took a deep breath and double-clicked the file. The playback started with the familiar muffled sounds from inside a pocket. Then the sound of the cruiser's door closing. He heard his own voice starting his shift, followed by Miller's grunts. He fast-forwarded through 15 minutes of banal chatter about sports and station house gossip. Then came the dispatcher's voice, relaying the call about a suspicious person on Sycamore Crest Drive. He slowed the playback to normal speed. He could hear the car's engine, the faint squeak of the suspension as they turned onto the street. His own voice, tinny and distant. That looks like the F-150 the caller described. A beat of silence. And then Miller's voice, oozing with a casual, confident bigotry that was somehow more chilling than an outright shout. Yeah, look at him. An F-150 in Oakwood Crest bet you $100 it's stolen. You know how these people are. Let's go shake this tree and see what falls out. Kyle physically recoiled from the laptop, a wave of nausea washing over him. There it was, the poison. The premeditated prejudice spoken aloud before they'd even stepped out of the car. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a situation that got out of hand. It was a setup from the very beginning. Miller had judged, convicted, and sentenced Weston Briggs based on nothing more than the color of his skin and the neighborhood he was in. He kept listening, torturing himself with the rest of the recording. He heard the entire encounter from the pen's perspective in his shirt pocket. He heard Major Briggs's calm, reasonable voice. He heard Miller's escalating aggression. And worst of all, he heard his own silence. A vast, damning, cowardly silence. When the recording ended, he slumped forward, his forehead resting on the cool surface of the desk. The choice was gone. There was no more ambiguity, no more gray area to hide in. The pen had recorded the unvarnished truth, and in doing so it had recorded a verdict on his own character. This wasn't an insurance policy to save his job anymore. It was a lifeline to save his soul. He picked up his phone, his hands surprisingly steady, and called the number for the attorney the union had provided him. I need to make a new statement, he said when the sleepy lawyer answered, and I have evidence, undeniable evidence. A few days later, the storm broke. As promised, the Oakwood Police Department released the body camera footage. The public airing was an unmitigated catastrophe. News channels played the videos on a loop. The footage was stark, showing a composed professional military officer being systematically humiliated by an aggressive cop. Chief Evans's phone rang off the hook. The mayor, the city council, the governor's office, they all wanted answers. But the body cam was just the opening salvo. The next morning, a local investigative reporter acting on a tip from Peterson's now proactive lawyer dropped the real bomb. Secret recording reveals officers' racial bias in Briggs' arrest. The headline screamed. The article quoted Miller's words verbatim. You know how these people are. Let's go shake this tree and see what falls out. That one sentence became the epitaph for 2 careers. It was irrefutable. It was disgusting. It was the smoking gun that blew the case wide open, exposing the rot at its core. The blue wall of silence that Miller had counted on crumbled to dust. Chief Michael Evans sat in his office, the article displayed on his monitor. He felt sick. He had been outmaneuvered and publicly checkmated. The political pressure was no longer a storm. It was a Category 5 hurricane, and his department was at ground zero. He called a press conference for that afternoon. The room was a shark tank of reporters and flashing cameras. Chief Evans walked to the podium, his face grim, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Effective immediately, he announced, his voice heavy with resignation. Officer Colton Miller and Officer Kyle Peterson have been terminated from the Oakwood Police Department. Their actions, as revealed on body camera footage and other recordings, are a profound betrayal of their oath and a disgrace to the badge. They do not represent the values of this department or the vast majority of men and women who serve this city with honor every day. A criminal investigation into the filing of a false report has been opened. There is no place for racism or abuse of power in the Oakwood PD. Not now, not ever. For Colton Miller, watching from his living room, the world tilted on its axis. But the firing was just the first domino. The next week, a certified letter from the city arrived informing him that the pension board had initiated proceedings to revoke his retirement benefits due to felonious conduct. 2 days after that, 2 detectives from the county prosecutor's office knocked on his door with a warrant for his arrest. As he was being led away in handcuffs, a bitter, stunning irony. His wife stared at him with cold, dead eyes, the divorce papers already drafted and waiting on the kitchen table. For Kyle Peterson, the consequences were just as severe, but they felt different. He too was fired disgraced. He accepted a plea deal for his false statement, 2 years of probation, a permanent misdemeanor on his record, and a lifetime ban from working in law enforcement. He had lost the only career he ever wanted. But as he confessed everything to Chloe, and then to the investigators, he felt the suffocating weight in his chest begin to lift. He had lost his job, but he had reclaimed a small, vital piece of himself. The path ahead was uncertain and terrifying, but for the first time in weeks, it was a path he could walk with his head held high. His lawyer's final piece of advice was the hardest to swallow. "If you ever want to truly move past this," he said, "there's one more person you need to face." Kyle knew he was right. He had to face Major Briggs. He had to look the man he had wronged in the eye and offer an apology, knowing full well it would never be enough. It was the final, most difficult step on his painful road to redemption. A year can feel like a lifetime. In the 12 months that followed the firings, the echoes of that single night on Sycamore Crest Drive rippled outwards, reshaping lives with the slow, inexorable force of a tide. For some, it was a tide that pulled them under. For others, it offered a chance to learn to swim. The sun beat down on the blacktop, the July air thick with the acrid smell of hot tar. A man on his knees, his face shielded by a dirty baseball cap, smoothed a patch of asphalt with a trowel. His hands, once accustomed to the grip of a steering wheel and the cold steel of a service weapon, were now raw and calloused. Colton Miller didn't look up as a gleaming silver Lexus, the kind he used to see gliding through Oakwood Crest, drove past. He just felt a familiar sour burn in his gut. This was his life now. The lawsuit from Briggs had financially ruined him, and the criminal conviction for filing a false report made him a ghost haunting the fringes of the workforce. A car pulled over, and a young woman with a press badge approached him cautiously. "Mr. Miller Colton. Miller." He flinched at the name. "Get lost," he growled, not looking at her. "I just wanted to ask if you have any reflections on the anniversary of the Briggs incident." Miller scrambled to his feet, his face a twisted mask of fury and humiliation. "Reflections? You want reflections?" He spat flecks of spittle flying from his lips. That son of a bitch ruined my life. The department, the city. They all fed me to the wolves to save themselves. I was a good cop. I was doing my job. The woman took a step back, her professional demeanor faltering in the face of his raw venom. He saw the pity in her eyes, and it was worse than hate. He turned his back on her, the weight of his bitterness, a physical burden that bent his spine. He was a man trapped in a prison of his own making, rattling the bars and blaming everyone but the man who had turned the key himself. The photo she took that day of the disgraced ex-cop on his knees would become the final ignominious chapter in his public saga. 2 states away in a noisy community center gym that smelled of sweat and floor wax, another life was being rebuilt. Kyle Peterson sat on the bleachers talking to a 15-year-old named Leo, who'd been caught shoplifting. "They're all against me, man," Leo said, bouncing a basketball. "The system's rigged." A year ago, Peterson might have given the kid a stern lecture. Now he just sighed. "The system can be unfair," he said, his voice quiet. "But that doesn't let you off the hook for your own choices. I once made a bad choice. I stood by and did nothing, while a man I worked with did a terrible thing to a good person. I was scared. I thought about myself, my job, my reputation. And you know what? I lost all of it anyway." He looked the teenager in the eye. "Lying to protect yourself feels easy in the moment, Leo. But it eats you from the inside out. Telling the truth, that was the hardest thing I ever did. It cost me my career. But it let me look my wife in the face again. It lets me sleep at night. It's the only thing that lets me be here talking to you without feeling like a complete fraud." The apology to Major Briggs hadn't been a magic eraser. It was an agonizing admission of failure. But it had been the first true step. Peterson's life was quiet now, a logistics job, a small apartment, a baby girl who had just learned to say, "Dada." It was a life built not on the authority of a badge, but on the painstaking brick-by-brick reconstruction of his own character. Back in Oakwood, the police department was undergoing its own reconstruction. The Briggs Mandate was now institutional policy. In a training classroom, Sergeant Wallace stood before a new class of recruits. On the large screen behind him was a still from Miller's body cam, the image of Major Briggs, calm and dignified, with his hands cuffed behind his back. "Look at this picture," Wallace commanded, his voice heavy. "Burn it into your brains. This is the moment a 15-year career ended. This is the moment our department's reputation was destroyed and had to be rebuilt from the ground up. It happened because one officer saw a black man in a flight suit and decided who he was before he ever said a word." He pressed a button, and Miller's voice filled the room, tinny and cruel from the secret recording. "Let's go shake this tree and see what falls out." Wallace paused the audio. The silence in the room was absolute. "That," he said, "is the sound of failure. It's the sound of prejudice. And if I ever hear it from one of you, you won't just be fired. We will personally hand you over to the district attorney." And on a crisp autumn day at the United States Air Force Academy, the man at the center of it all stood at a podium. The silver oak leaf insignia of a lieutenant colonel gleamed on his shoulders. Before him sat a sea of blue, the next generation of officers. In the front row, his wife Sarah squeezed their daughter Maya's hand, her eyes shining with pride. Before he spoke, Weston allowed himself a moment. He looked at his family, his anchor. He thought of that night, the humiliation, the cold bite of the steel on his wrists, the surge of fury he had to suppress. It wasn't a memory of trauma anymore. It was a memory of purpose. It was the moment that had led him here. "A uniform is a heavy thing," he began, his voice calm and clear, resonating through the vast auditorium. "It's more than just fabric and thread and insignia. It carries the weight of history, of expectation, of trust. Whether it is the uniform of the United States Air Force or the uniform of a local police department, it is a symbol. It is a promise. It is a covenant of trust between the wearer and the community they serve." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the young, eager faces. That trust is fragile. It can be broken in an instant by one act of prejudice, one failure of character. But it can be fortified by 1,000 acts of integrity, courage, and honor. Your duty as officers and leaders is not just to fly the planes or lead the missions. It is to be guardians of that trust every single day, in every single interaction. Be the person your uniform promises you will be. As thunderous applause filled the hall, Weston's eyes found Maya's. He gave her a small, private wink. He had faced down an ugly injustice not with a weapon, but with the unwavering strength of his character. The phone call had been the catalyst, but the true force for change had been a lifetime of integrity, meeting a moment of profound prejudice. Justice had prevailed, and in its wake the world was left with a powerful, enduring echo. Character is the only authority that truly matters. The story of Lieutenant Colonel Weston Briggs is a powerful reminder that integrity is the ultimate authority. It shows us how the courage of one person and the principled stand of another can dismantle a system of prejudice, one injustice at a time. The karma that found Officers Miller and Peterson wasn't supernatural. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of their own actions when exposed to the light. Their story serves as a harsh lesson about the abuse of power, while Weston Briggs's journey illustrates the quiet strength of honor. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the message, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more compelling, true-life stories where character is tested and karma delivers its verdict. Thank you for listening.